Majo John Madden in Veracruz, Mexico. Veracruz is one of the most important commercial ports in Mexico. And look at that freight liner. That's carrying cars, maybe from England or from Germany over to Mexico. It's a huge port. And I just got back here last night. I had been gone for 2 months and I love Veracruz, adore Veracruz, and I'm kind of high today. I'm so over the moon to be back here. So I've got a story. I'm an old guy, I'm 77 now, and I've been there and done that. I've been involved in some of the most important movements in America, honestly, starting with the flower child, pre-love generation. I never became a full-time hippie because after taking a year off from school after college, I instead of going to Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco and becoming a real hippie, I stayed in Chicago and married a woman much like my mother, and then went back to grad school. I also was involved in another movement of opening up in the U.S., which we go through waves. I'm still saying we about the U.S., of opening up and then clamping down. The next one was the personal growth movement in the 80s and 90s. And all the stuff people did to become more real as opposed to keeping up a front. So I was involved in a lot of that stuff also. I'm going to tell a story about one of the ways I was involved in that. Right at the heart of the personal growth movement was something called the EST training. Werner Erhard was a famous entrepreneur and brilliant guy who created this EST training, Erhard something training. And it was huge. Thousands of people went through it. I went through it. I got actually an awful lot out of it. But it was so harsh, so confrontive, that I never suggested it to any of my friends because I couldn't recommend that they go through something that was so difficult. In Chicago, I had not done it in Chicago, but I was back in Chicago, my hometown, and I was a psychotherapist. And one of the things I built my practice around, or at least had a lot of clients from, there was a guy in Chicago named Gary McCabe, who was very much in the mode of Werner Erhard. He would pick up people who had come out of the S training, which later got called Landmark, I think maybe to get away from some of the legendary notions about its successes. And they'd go through that training, and this guy in Chicago, Gary McCabe, was much like Werner Erhard, and he would do groups, follow-on groups with people who had come through the S training. And he was so confrontive, so challenging, that people in his groups would unravel and have all kinds of reactions to him. And he hired 2 of us full-time psychotherapists to do therapy with those folks so they would not have such disastrous outcomes and would hopefully stay in his groups, because he was making a lot of money. The 2 offices I worked with him, one of them was on the west side of Chicago in a very shishi neighborhood. And the other was in, I can't remember the name of the building, but it's a curvy building right out on the lakefront. It sticks way out in the lake, and it's a famous building in Chicago. And I did therapy in an office he had in his apartment there, which was quite stunning. So in that period, I was dating a woman named Jennifer, who was the love of my adult life. She was tall, brilliant, funny, so accomplished. She was a full-time trainer of mind-body psychotherapy that people from the era would recognize the name of it. I can't even remember it anymore. It's like 30 years ago. But she was amazing. Also quite competitive, and with a fair amount of ego. She liked to look good, to position herself well, including with me. She was competitive with me. So we were walking down the street where worked with Gary in his office in the west side of Chicago. And she had been lovers with him. And she was embarrassed about it because it had been a couple years before. And he was such a legendary womanizer in Chicago. She didn't want me to know that she had been lovers with him at one point. Well, we're walking down the street, and we walked by Gary's office. And I said to Jennifer, yeah, well, over there, that's Gary McCabe's office. I used to do therapy in conjunction with him. And when she realized that I knew Gary McCabe and probably knew as much as everybody else did about what a infamous womanizer and kind of a jerk he was, she got so undone, she fell off the curb, and then told me the story. Yeah, Gary McCabe. He was a creature of the era. I was in some ways a creature of the era. But you know, the U.S. is going through another wave now of trying to... We had all that opening after the George Floyd murders. And it looked like they called it the Summer America's Racial Reckoning. It spilled over into a whole year. And now the Republicans are trying to shut down that whole thing. Say racism doesn't count. Slavery didn't count. Actually, the slaves benefited from, all that craziness that's going on now. Yeah. And I've actually been involved in that one too, because the summer of 21 in Louisville, Kentucky, where Breonna Taylor was killed, police raid on her apartment where they shot her dead in her bed. That one predated George Floyd by 2 months, but lots of us believe that the Black Lives Matter movement sprang more out of Breonna Taylor than George Floyd. And I spent the whole summer of 21 in Louisville, Kentucky, working with Black Lives Matter to try to get justice for Breonna. I had her picture in the window of my car, which lots of the shops did, because much of the black population in Louisville considered her the martyr of Louisville, and the women especially felt motherly towards. They all felt like Breonna's mother. Yeah. Okay, that's enough of all that. Bye.